Does authoritarianism have a place in American society? Seriously, ask yourself that question. You almost certainly said no, but why do we all feel that way? Do you know what authoritarianism is? I didn't really have a good definition of it before I started working on this video. Essentially, authoritarianism is the blind support or the blind submission to authority and the repression of individual freedom of thought and action. This sounds pretty terrible, right? I'm pretty sure I'm against this. I like freedom. I generally like being able to do what I want. That's a fundamental American value. Conservatives know this. They talk about this all the time. They want free speech, freedom to own guns, freedom from the government from taking their money. They constantly talk about how Democrats are trying to take these things away from them. But when you look at the definition, doesn't this kind of remind you of something? For me, I see a perfect parallel in the way that Trump supporters line up with an authority and obedience to Donald Trump, at the expense of their personal freedom. Most recently, Trump promoted the Haitian immigrants eating cats and dogs narrative. A few weeks ago, a narrative began on Twitter claiming Haitian immigrants were eating pets in Springfield, Ohio. This conspiracy was not widespread, but during the debate between Trump and Harris, out of sheer desperation, Trump reliably fell back on a source of misinformation. He said,
"They're eating the dogs."
This straight up is not happening. There are no reports of Haitian immigrants eating Springfield pets. A few viral videos were spread that Trump supporters claimed were proof of this conspiracy. They were quickly debunked. One of them was a non-Haitian man clearing roadkill, and the other one was a Haitian immigrant cooking chicken on a barbecue. But regardless, the conspiracy was quickly adopted by his supporters. This example alone is not proof of authoritarianism. It's not necessarily authoritarian for a famous person to promote something and their followers to believe them, even if the thing in question is a conspiracy. But usually, when misinformation that's this crazy and unfounded makes its way into the public discourse, it's quickly fact-checked, dismissed, and it's done with. If I told you that elephants are the world's largest mammal, you might believe me. You might later look it up and see that it's actually blue whales and realize I was wrong, and then you would move on. But that's not what happens with Trump supporters. The misinformation is not only integrated into his supporters' minds, but any deviance from adopting these conspiracies is met with consequence. And it's important to distinguish here between ideological conservatism and Trump loyalism. In theory, a Republican who doesn't think Haitian immigrants are literally eating cats and dogs, but is concerned about illegal immigration and wants tougher sanctions on the border, they would be welcomed by Trump and Trump supporters. In theory, this would be sufficient. But that's not what happens. There are countless examples of conservative Republicans who don't really have disagreements with Trump on major policy or ideological issues, but are nonetheless marked as enemies because of their unwillingness to become Trumpist sycophants. Look at Dick Cheney, Mitt Romney, Mike Pence, even Mitch McConnell. Look at the comments on any Ben Shapiro video that even lightly criticized Trump. Or look at how quickly Fox News was excised from Trump's coalition after a few hosts pushed back on the rigged election conspiracy and January 6th riots. These figureheads have effectively been ostracized from the right because the right's allegiance is no longer to conservatism, but to Trumpism. According to a CNN poll in August of 2023, 70% of Republicans believe Biden was illegitimately elected in 2020. To be clear, there is no evidence that Biden was illegitimately elected, and don't take my word for it. 63 court cases found that there was no widespread election fraud, and many of these cases were adjudicated by Republican judges. And this conspiracy was important enough to Trump supporters that they attempted to prevent the peaceful transfer of power on January 6th, when they violently raided the Capitol building in hopes to prevent the certification of the election and/or hang Mike Pence if he didn't unilaterally declare Trump as the president. The results don't matter to Trump or his supporters. The only thing that matters is Trump's word. The only goal is to keep Trump in power. The process does not matter. Elections do not matter. The Constitution does not matter. The blind submission to authority and the repression of individual freedom of thought and action. January 6th is the perfect representation of this definition. The people that rioted on January 6th and the people that today still believe this lie are in blind submission to the authority that is Trump and attempted to repress Americans' freedoms to elect their representatives. Earlier, we all agreed that authoritarianism is not a system of governance that we want in America. So how can we make sense of the fact that so many millions of people now subscribe to authoritarianism? How do these people explain the contradiction to themselves? If you're a left-winger watching, you might say, well, it's because they're dumb. And that answer might resolve the issue for you, but it's not that simple, because the tendency towards authoritarianism is not unique to just Trump supporters. Over the last several years, there have been calls from the left to pack the courts in order to force through verdicts on progressive priorities, to incorporate Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. as states, to eliminate the filibuster and abolish the Electoral College and Senate. Now, there are valid arguments for why some of these things might be just, But that doesn't answer the question of why the left is pushing these drastic changes in institutions. It's because it will lead to more Democratic politicians being in power, which will make it easier to ram through legislation. It's not relevant whether or not these changes are actually right, it just matters that they are politically expedient. In this way, the newfound acceptance of authoritarianism is bipartisan. To be clear, no left-wingers have stormed the Capitol. They haven't filed dozens of lawsuits trying to cheat the American people out of a fair and free election. But the sentiment that fuels a Bernie supporter to promote adding 7 additional justices to the Supreme Court is fundamentally the same sentiment that inspires a MAGA supporter to break through the Capitol windows. And the sentiment, at its core, is authoritarian. Now that we've determined that authoritarianism has been accepted by a wide range of people, the question becomes, what is wrong with authoritarianism, and why is democracy a better choice? Let's put things into perspective. If you're a Republican, how would you feel if next month Trump fairly wins the presidential election and Kamala told Democrats that this election was in fact stolen and the only way to save their country was to forcibly take Trump out of office? Would you guys be okay with that? Probably not. You would say what Democrats have been saying for the last 4 years. You would say there's no evidence for this election being stolen, that the people who stormed the Capitol should be jailed, that they should be convicted of treason, and you'd be completely right to think that. That's how we feel right now. And if you say, no, it's different because the 2020 election was actually stolen, sorry, once again, there's no evidence for that. You're just believing what one man is saying, and that's it, point blank. So it turns out there isn't really a contradiction. People just want their person in office. They want their ideas to be passed and put into legislation. They don't really care how it happens, just as long as it does. We just learned that a massive amount of people support authoritarianism. But what does this mean? Did people ever really oppose this ideology? Is America still a beacon of freedom and democracy? The reality is that sometimes your team loses. You aren't always going to win, but the back and forth between sides is what makes for a strong country. It makes for a strong people. We have to go back to the time of compromise. If a Democrat or a Republican comes into power, we have to be able to handle whichever outcome. We can't just complain. Otherwise, we're no better than people who full-on accept authority rule.